today. Sorry, I leave to my co-chairman.
Thank you, Hugo. Now our two missing speakers are expected to arrive here.
But we have already one.
We have already one, but the others, Patrick and the president of Fincantieri, are arriving around 10:45. So the suggestion is that, having heard interesting and sometimes a bit controversial presentations, we now open the floor for questions. Now, interesting, and I said sometimes controversial. For instance, if you talk about measuring CO2, I was pleased that Andrea said we are not going for direct emission measuring, because for me the basic thing is the bunker book. How much do you bunker? And that fits in with an energy saving culture which many companies, I know from Grimaldi, have today. But the reporting as such, the presentation made by Andrea was talking about an EU regulation. For me, reporting of CO2 or bunker consumption should be global. IMO should be done, I guess, by flag states and port state control. Andrea mentioned the 2015 date where electronic reporting will be done. I doubt whether all EU member states will be ready to have a single window to receive electronic reporting by 2015. So a lot of controversial issues. I was very interested in the presentation of Umberto D'Amato about 15% or more energy saving, and then having heard Francesco about guarantees and liability and what have you, I was hoping he would say something about the performance of scrubbers. Where is the guarantee there? Who is liable there if it doesn't work? Anyway, a lot of interesting statements made, sometimes controversial, so I would open the floor for questions or comments, maybe starting with the panel. Some comments, questions from the panel?
Well, just a comment on this bunker savings, slow steaming, and eco ships. I think it's very dangerous to generalize and talk about 15% or 20% or 50%. It depends extremely much on which vessel segment we are talking about and what vessel size, etc. It depends on the speed more than anything else. So the first point I'd like to make to everybody owning and operating ships is slow down. It's good for the market, it's good for the environment, and it doesn't cost any investment to reduce the emissions fairly dramatically. And I would encourage everybody before embarking on buying eco ships to do very thorough homework on what the consumption difference is on various speeds for the segment that you're looking at. Again, it varies by segment. I represent Pacific Basin, a Hong Kong listed handy-size bulker owner and operator. We are the world's largest handy-size operator with 225 ships on the water. We own about a third, but increasingly so, and charter in the rest. We are an operator, so we use all the ships ourselves. And I totally agree with Mr. Grimaldi's comments to encourage bankers and investors to back owners and operators and not only speculators, but where there is cargo backing of the company and the strategy. But we pay the fuel bills on all our 225 ships, and so we care a lot about you know, how high those fuel bills are. And we know a lot about handy-size bulkers and handy-max bulkers consumption. And for us, we're steaming at about 10 knots, 10 or 10 and a half knots. And at that speed, the difference between a good second-hand ship and a new so-called eco ship is about 1 ton, 1 or 1.5 ton. So we have bought primarily second-hand ships rather than new buildings. It's pure mathematics. But in this segment, it's still possible to buy good second-hand ships, because that fuel difference varies not only on the speed, but also which ship are you comparing with. Are you comparing with a bad second-hand ship, or are you comparing with a good second-hand ship? The handy-size bulkers is a very Japanese-focused segment. The Japanese shipyards have specialized in building very good handy-size bulkers. So you can buy a 32,000 deadweight Hakodate or Kanda or Oshima or one of the major Japanese shipyard second-hand ships, and the fuel difference compared to a new design at 10 knots is about 1 ton. And you can do the math on that. It doesn't really pay. So the eco ship strategy is different for each segment. It's more difficult for us to find good second-hand ships in the Handy Max segment. A lot of the existing available ships to buy in the Handy Max segment, or Supramax or Ultramax as it's often called, are not the best quality built Chinese ships with not very good consumption. So there you're sometimes driven towards ordering a new ship rather than buying a second hand. But I would also encourage you to do the homework on the eco strategy, because the eco ship strategy is a high-speed strategy to a very large degree. Our strategy is not a high-speed strategy. We assume that bunker prices will remain fairly high, and therefore slow steaming is there to stay, and we care more about having a low cost at a low market at a high bunker price than the reverse. So the eco ship strategy really banks on ships speeding up, maybe from 10 knots to the design speed of 14 knots. And as you can calculate, that would add an enormous amount of capacity to the market, which would again drive market rates down again. So those are some of the comments on eco ships.
Thank you, Mats. You rightly said that you cannot generalize. Each sector is different, and listening to you sailing at 10 knots, I think Emanuele Grimaldi with his fleet cannot sail at 10 knots. Manuel?
Although I think that the situation is extremely different from Handymax and important big fast ro-ro ships, especially if they are ro-packs and they are carrying passengers. When we are talking about vessels where the passengers have always hurry, you can see that sometimes absurd speeds are also used in transportation of passengers. But I think we can generalize that slow steaming makes sense. Generally speaking, is one of the most important systems also to address the supply and demand problem. So slow steaming has been used for container vessels. the biggest of all the vessels of this type. So I have definitely the biggest economy of scale applied. So let's say I think I have 80% of the biggest ro-ro in the world. All the vessels of above 3,000 and 4,000 linear meters mainly are owned by my group. So there, of course, you have the economy of scale and you have low consumption. But we are talking not only of 10 times the cost of the financement, but what it is extremely important, it is 3 times more than the cost of the 10,000 people working in the group. So we have 10,000 people. Whilst we were obsessed when I was young about productivity, I don't think that the productivity of the people working is the biggest. Today, energy saving, at least in my group, is by far the most important, although of course productivity remains important. And then we come even to the acquisition of the vessel. The 7 billion euro value of the fleet, amortized in 20, 22 years, how much should it be? This equals to 300 million, 250, 350 million, depending on how you amortize your own fleet. But still, this is less than half. So even the importance of buying the ships is less than energy saving. And of course, definitely on some of our trajects, although we have reduced the speed, we cannot reduce it so much because otherwise the people who are shipping with us would lose interest. We shouldn't forget that ro-ro is connected to the just-in-time, and this is why it's preferred to the container. Why to travel by trailer and not by container? Because you need the quickest delivery. And even quicker with Pax ferries where you drive in and drive out. And even more when you are talking about passengers. I don't know why, but we are all obsessed about time. I find something very, very strange because I enjoy to take a normal ship often to go to Capri or and then there are these hydrofoils, which I don't feel so comfortable inside, like on a nice vessel on the deck, particularly during spring and I prefer to have a longer journey, which is 1 hour. Those vessels cost half of it. But you see, even the domestic help working in the house in Capri and in Ischia, they're all traveling by hydrofoil. Nobody's traveling on a nice ferry. So people are obsessed with time, and therefore you have to find a commercial type of compromise between the desired speed and the expense.
Thank you. Mats and Emanuele have shown us the two different perspectives.